So all we've learned so far, all this factoring we've learned is leading up to solving equations by factoring. Now, I want to notice everything we've done so far today. There's no equations involved, right? There were just expressions that we had to factor. And none of these were equations. And now we're going to have equations. Before we practice this, there's a little property in math that we need to know first. And this is the property that allows us to do this work. And you are expected to know this. The zero factor property. Anybody know what that is? I'm sure you've probably used it before. But it says, when the product of two numbers is equal to 0, then something must be true. Then absolutely at least one of those numbers has to be what? If I got two numbers that are multiplied to be 0, then at least one of those numbers has to be 0. Because you cannot multiply any two numbers and get 0 unless one of those numbers is 0. You can't pick two non-zero numbers, multiply them, and get 0. The only way you can get 0 by multiplying is by multiplying it by 0 itself. In other words, we can say this. In symbols, this is probably the one that might help you. In symbols, if A times B is equal to 0, that's the first line. The product of two numbers is equal to 0. If A times B is equal to 0, then one of those numbers has to be 0. So we can say then either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. Okay? By factoring, we're going to be able to use this property and solve some equations. Okay? Let's start off with examples. One more thing I want to tell you first. The standard form of a quadratic equation is, I already mentioned a little bit about standard form earlier. Thought I did. Kind of mentioned a little bit here earlier, this ax squared plus bx plus c. That's exactly that, is ax squared plus bx plus c. But we're talking about an equation, so that's got to be equal to, and we want to use the zero property law, so it's going to be equal to 0. Okay? Now let's get to that example. X squared plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0.